Hello, my name is Hadley Kelly, and I'm the director of the Visiting Scholar Program. Thank you for joining us for what will be a dynamic hour of conversation. And please stay tuned until the end when Linda Greenhouse will present Jean Howard with the John Hope Franklin Award for her years of service to Phi Beta Kappa, and in particular to the Visiting Scholar Program. Given that we have a limited time with our presenters today, we aren't going to be able to take audience questions in this session. We do encourage you to engage with one another, share resources, and exchange ideas using the chat function. Before we begin, a quick note for those of you serving as voting delegates for the triennial. Following yesterday's early adjournment due to technical difficulties, we will be holding the second plenary session at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time today, where you will be voting on the combined business of the council. We will be opening the session 15 minutes early so that voting delegates may mark themselves present before the start of the meeting. For more information, please see the email sent out this morning with the subject line, Day 3, Triennial Council Meeting. Thank you in advance for your patience. So I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Professor Jean Howard, and our three panelists, all of whom served as Phi Beta Kappa visiting scholars in 2020-2021, Peter Meineck, Evie Shockley, and Roger Gwenver Smith for the Visiting Scholar Spotlight, the Arts and Social Movements. I could speak about each of them for a very long time, but we'll try to be brief. All three former visiting scholars were interviewed by Secretary Fred Lawrence for our Key Conversations with Phi Beta Kappa podcast, which you can find on most podcast platforms as well as on our website. There you can hear a bit more from them about their backgrounds and scholarships directly. The episodes that feature them are quite excellent, and I encourage you to take a listen. Professor Peter Meineck holds the endowed chair of Professor of Classics and the Modern World at New York University and is honorary professor of humanities at the University of Nottingham in the UK. He specializes in ancient performance, cognitive theory, Greek literature and culture, and humanities public programming. In addition to his academic career, he has worked extensively in the professional theater in New York and London, founding Aquila Theater in 1991. Professor Meineck held virtual visits to Wake Forest University, University of Arkansas, William and Mary, Catholic University, and Carleton College. Professor Evie Shockley is professor of English at Rutgers University. She is the author of 3 books of poetry, including Semi-Automatic, which won the Hurston Wright Legacy Award and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the LA Times Book Prize. Her publications include A Critical Study, Renegade Poetics, Black Aesthetics, and Formal Innovation in African American Poetry, and her essays and poems are widely published. Professor Shockley held virtual visits to Virginia Tech, Texas A&M University, Bucknell University, Gettysburg College, and University of Denver. Mr. Roger Gwenver Smith is an actor, writer, and director who has created a prolific body of work on stage and on screen. He adapted his Obie Award-winning performance of a Huey P. Newton story into a Peabody Award-winning telefilm. His Bessie Award-winning Rodney King is currently streaming on Netflix. His latest solo is Otto Frank, inspired by the father of diarist Anne Frank. For the international stage, Mr. Smith has also created and performed studies of Frederick Douglass, Christopher Columbus, and Bob Marley. And he has numerous screen credits. Mr. Smith studied at Yale University and Occidental College and is taught at both institutions as well as Cal Arts, where he directs his performing history workshop. Mr. Smith held virtual visits to Goucher College, St. Joseph's University, Florida State University, Birmingham Southern College, and UC Irvine. Our moderator today is Professor Jean Howard, who is the George Delacorte Professor in the Humanities at Columbia University, where she teaches early modern literature, Shakespeare, feminist studies, and theater history. Professor Howard has received several awards for the teaching and mentoring of graduate students and has directed over 50 doctoral dissertations. Her book on King Lear is forthcoming, and she's also completing another book that considers the different genealogies of the history play in America and England in the 20th and 21st centuries. She regularly teaches at Taconic Women's Correctional Facility as part of Columbia University's Justice and Education Initiative. She joined the Visiting Scholar Committee in 2009 as a senator and became the chairperson in 2012, and has been an invaluable leader to the committee and to the program at large. On a personal note, I have adored working with her over the past almost 5 years. Jean's patience, humor, enthusiasm, and kindness are extraordinary, and her vision for the Visiting Scholar Program and its participants has been instrumental in the incredible scholars who are selected every year. The program would not be what it is today without her. Before the conversation between these panelists begins, I'd like to share some reflections and testimonials about the Visiting Scholar Program from 3 chapter representatives. Due to the pandemic, the visiting scholars were unable to physically visit the schools, and all of the visits over the past academic year were virtual. We weren't sure how that was going to go, as one of the most special parts of the program is a human interaction between all parties involved in the visit. Although we are all looking forward to going back to in-person visits, it's a testament to the PBK chapters and visiting scholars that they made the visits successful in other ways, and overwhelmingly so. But I'll let you hear it directly from them.
I'm Jennifer Paxton from the Beta chapter at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. And earlier this year, we hosted Dr. Peter Meineck of New York University. Over the course of 2 days, Dr. Meineck gave a guest presentation and a graduate seminar on dramaturgy. He delivered a public lecture on the origins of drama in ancient Athens, and he led a demonstration of his work with a company of military veterans who produce ancient plays. People tuned in to the public lecture from all over the world, and our students and faculty learned so much about the role of war and politics in ancient drama, and vice versa, including many lessons that could be applied to contemporary times. We were particularly inspired by Dr. Meineck's work with veterans, which really embodies the Phi Beta Kappa message that the humanities enrich every human endeavor. It was a wonderful 2 days, and I can't recommend the Phi Beta Kappa Visiting Scholars Program strongly enough.
Hi, I'm Marianne O'Farrell at Texas A&M University. Evie Shockley visited with us in fall 2020 as part of the Visiting Scholars Program, and we loved having her. It was, of course, a virtual visit, and one of the great things about it was that Evie helped us, I think, move beyond the limits of our little Zoom boxes to re-engage with the world and to think about what's great about living in the world, and also what the demands of the world are on us as humans. While she was with us, she gave a poetry reading. She conducted a craft discussion about poetry and politics. She visited an undergraduate class devoted to the work and history of Black intellectuals, and she met more informally with faculty and students interested in creative writing. I heard from lots of students and faculty and PBK members after Professor Shockley left us, and they all talked about how interesting and challenging and lovely she was, and how inspiring. My favorite emails were from students saying that she made them want to write, which is just a really great thing. And one email said, "Thank you for the gift of Evie Shockley." Thanks really, of course, to Evie for that gift, and also to the Visiting Scholars Program.
This is Mark Shantz with Beta of Alabama here at Birmingham Southern College, and I'd like to toast our Phi Beta Kappa visiting scholar for this past year, Roger Gwenver Smith. Roger joined us on February 24th and 25th, and during that time, he visited a seminar in our Media and Film Studies program, joined my first year class on history and film, where we did a deep dive into his performance in the role of Isaiah in Nate Parker's film, The Birth of a Nation. He also conducted a campus-wide forum with our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and our chapter. He also spent time with our president, Daniel Coleman. Roger's visit was an inspiration to all of us, and I think especially in my history and film class, we had a student actually ask him if he would be her life coach and mentor. And I think we all joined in that sentiment. So thank you, Roger, and thank you, Phi Beta Kappa, for making this happen.
Okay, I'd like to begin with some thank yous. Thank you to Hadley, both for her work on this committee and for her kind words, and also to all our chapters who really improvised this year in using a new format and having virtual visits, which we've never done before. And as you just heard, they went extremely well. And also to our 3 visitors today for the work they did during the year and for being willing to come and talk to us today. So I want to begin by having each of you say a bit about what the experience of being a visiting scholar did for you. How did it go to be a visiting scholar? What did you learn maybe that you haven't learned in other contexts? And Evie, let's start with you.
Oh, that's it's an interesting way to put it. I think one of the things that I learned from my visits, which I enjoyed much more than I was expecting, given what I had already learned about Zoom fatigue by that point, they really ended up being very renewing for me. And I think at the heart of that was what I could see in the students, that the conditions under which we were all trying to live and work and learn last year had not muted their hunger for the kinds of things that literature and perhaps especially poetry have to offer us, things that we possibly needed more in conditions where we're so stressed and so demoralized by what's going on. And what I'm thinking about is really the way that language can offer us, an outlet for some of the most difficult feelings and experiences that we confront. The literature and poetry gives us a way to express those griefs, the anger, and also reminds us of the pleasure and provides us with the pleasure that we need to sort of sustain life and return towards that way that we meet the demands of living. And so talking with the students and the faculty at the various schools that I visited just gave me this sort of steady influx of energy and reminders that it's when we come together and talk and share in writing, but in conversation about art and the things that we're confronting, that process of exchange and coming together is what feeds the future art and the future of whatever we're going to make of the society. So I was otherwise on sabbatical last year, and these visits were that much more important for my sense of what's possible.
Thanks, Evie. What about you, Roger?
I agree. I concur completely with what Evie was saying, and will say also that what this experience was a kind of reclamation of commitment for me to not just the academic pursuit, but to the social, the necessary political, the necessary function as citizen. What we, I think, are really focused on doing in this moment, the necessity of it, I know that we're going to talk a little bit about the frailty of the Academy at this present moment, how the Academy is under attack to a certain degree. And to travel the country virtually in this electronic box was quite a journey. And it was a journey through the hearts, the minds, the disappointments of young people who had not signed up for any of this, who thought that they were going to be able to come to a campus and freely express themselves, and have not been. They have been under a certain degree of lockdown, as have we all. And they are young people who have had losses, as we have all throughout this world. And to jump into the crisis armed with poetry, armed with theater, armed with history, I think is a battle that's worth fighting.
Thank you, Roger. Peter, anything you want to add?
Well, just briefly, I mean, I'm so glad that Phi Beta Kappa didn't cancel the program. And you know, even though obviously not being able to travel and meet people in person was a negative, but they turned it into a positive, and that's really important, that continuity of exchange. Really stressful year, right? Such a stressful year. So to have these little moments of just thinking about art and literature and history and theater and poetry, it was sort of beauty in amongst all this horrible stuff that was going on. And it made me think about, you know, the concept of liveness. You know, Philip Auslander, who Roger I'm sure will know, and probably Evie, is this sort of film theorist who asked this question a few years ago, right? Is liveness dead? Right now everything is in mass media. But I realized that Zoom is still live, right? Even though we're not actually with each other, it still has the serendipities of something that's live. And I came to appreciate that. And I was also able to bring some people with me sometimes, like the vets I brought to Catholic University. I was like, hey, I'm going to beam you guys in. So that was kind of fun to be able to use that technology. So I just am really glad we got to do it, and it wasn't cancelled. And it was certainly good for my psyche, and I got a lot out of it. So I want to thank everybody for that.
Well, we're supposed to talk today. We want to talk today about the relationship of our artistic practice and social movements, the activist movements that are in the ether right now, or in the academy, and how you think about the relationship between your artistic practice and these larger social movements in the world around us, whether it's Black Lives Matter or another kind of movement. And how do you think of your work in relationship to these movements? Is it intentionally linked? Is it indirect? How do you think about our topic, really, of art and social movements? And maybe this time we should go backward and begin with Peter.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think all teachers, which is what we are, have a responsibility to teach everybody. And I think we have to open the door of the academy to everybody. And it's not right now, let's be honest. And we wrap ourselves up in the rhetoric of inclusivity, but you know, the academy is not an inclusive place. And I got a big dose of that, and my privilege, when I set up a program for refugee teams in New York. And, you know, the big deal was them getting an NYU ID, you know, to be allowed to be on campus, and going to the card center and having, you know, these kids get barked at for their passports and their ID, you know, these refugee kids who've been traumatized by this, but the very thing they don't have, right? And it just woke me up to my error in putting him in that situation. This was nobody's fault. It's just that our institutions sometimes are not nearly as welcoming as we think they are. And I think as we as professors or artists go out into the community, you know, we got to come back and like bring that back to our institutions. And so I definitely think that, you know, the last few years we've been through I think we're all deeply aware of that. So, so I think that's my takeaway. And the whole tenure system and the whole system of hiring scholars and academics, it needs to bust open to the idea that we're public intellectuals, and that's for everybody in the public, wherever they are and whoever they are. So yeah, I definitely feel quite passionately about that, and there's more we can do.
Evie, what do you think?
You know, I'm so frustrated by everything around this subject right now that I'm fighting back 15 ideas at once. In terms of my own work and its relationship to activism and just the relationship of activism to the academy generally, I think that part of what we're confronting in people's resistance to bringing those together is the limited way that people think about what activism is or requires, right? Mm-hmm. And so I write poetry and I do literary criticism, scholarship on literary history and literary theory. None of those things is going to change a government, right? And so by definition, I'm always clear that the work I'm producing, whether it be creative or research or somewhere a combination of the two, I'm always clear that what it's doing is, one, answering questions that I may have. And what I try to do is think about it as work that may be of service to or in support of the needs that activists in various kinds of social movements may have, right? And so, you know, it's not possible for me to write the literary reading of Gwendolyn Brooks that's going to, you know, change society, but it is possible for me to teach us something about what made Brooks change her life and her creative practice to some degree midway through her career when she encountered the Black arts movement, that will help people today think about what they're doing and how their lives might be changed by what's happening, for example, that you gave with Black Lives Matter. Or, you know, what if I write a poem that can be published in an anthology about climate change and help people rethink their relationship to climate movement, or whatever it may be. It's to me, the relationship between arts and intellectual pursuits and activism, they're parallel and interconnected without one dominating the other. And I think if we understand it that way, we're not so worried about whether the arts or our research is being, I don't know, pulled awry or weakened or any of those things by its commitment to, or the commitment of its producer to any particular social movement. I think that may be a kind of an angle on your question, but those are some.
It's very interesting. And I think the binary, even that our title has unconsciously set up between the arts and social movements as if they were separate, you're suggesting in most cases may not be true in your own practice, that things are interconnected rather than set into binary boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Roger, what would you have to think about when you think about your work in social movements? Do you think about being part of a social movement when you're performing and scripting?
I was conceived at an NAACP convention.
It's in your genes.
Absolutely. And my mother says that she remembers the place and the position, but I say, Mom, that's really too much information. I had the great privilege of studying with a woman by the name of Mary Jane Hewitt, MJ Hewitt, at Occidental College. And there has been a chair established in her name in the Black Studies Department, which has been endowed in her name as well at Oxy. She said to us one week, don't come to the classroom next week, go to the lounge. We're gonna need some more space. So we showed up at the lounge and there's MJ holding court with her good friend, Maya Angelou. Sitting next to Maya is the great actor, Roscoe Lee Brown, who gets up and does a scene from Derek Walcott's Dream on Monkey Mountain. Sitting over in the corner, smoking far too many cigarettes, a man by the name of James Baldwin. These people spoke to each other, loved each other, as only brothers and sisters could. And it was that moment that I was reminded that there is such a thing as a life in the arts and that it was worth living. Mm-hmm. And these are people who literally put their lives on the line to function, yes, as artists, but as citizens who struggled to find equal citizenship, not simply for themselves, but for an entire community of people. So I think that we have an opportunity to inspire, yes, within the community, but also outside of the community, within the institutions, within the prisons, on the streets. And that it's a remarkable responsibility that we have. And there are those who have come before us who laid the foundation that this work that we do might be easier, yes, but even more important, because we are committed, or should be committed, to what our predecessors have established.
Roger, would you be willing, I think our audience would like not only to hear about your work, all three of you, but to see a little bit of it. Would you be willing to do a couple minutes of one of your performances for
us? Sure.
Great.
We lost recently a gentleman by the name of Hal Holbrook, who for many, many years played Mark Twain in a solo performance called Mark Twain Tonight. And Mr. Holbrook's performance of Twain was always inspiring to me. And when I was working with MJ Hewitt at Occidental College, I said, I think I might want to do a one-man show. And she said, really? And I said, yeah, I think I might want to do Frederick Douglass. She said, I think that's a good idea. Let's work on that. And since those days, I have been doing a version of Douglass in a piece most recently entitled Frederick Douglass Now. It is civil war, the worst of all wars. For 20 years and more, we have given our strength, our moral and political influence to increase the power and ascendancy of slavery. And now this slave-holding power comes with sword, gun, and cannon to take the life of the nation and overthrow the great American government. Well, verily, they have their reward. The power given to crush the black man now overwhelms the white man. The nation has put one end of the chain around the ankle of the slave and the other end around its own neck. They've been planting tyrants, and they're now getting a harvest of civil war and anarchy. The American people and the government at Washington may refuse to recognize it for a time, but the inexorable logic of events will force it upon them in the end. That the civil war now being waged in this land is a war for and against slavery. And it can never be effectually put down till one or the other of these vital forces is completely destroyed. The irrepressible conflict, long confined to words and votes, is now to be carried by bayonets and bullets, and may God defend the right. Now, that was Douglas, April 1861, but he could have been writing about Washington, D.C., January 2021.
Thank you, Roger. Yes. In your work, you often choose historical people, and I know at one point you thought you might be an historian. Can you say a little bit about why you think it's important to reach back and do some historical figures like Douglas? You also have done very contemporary figures, or why Otto Frank would be interesting to you. How does history, work for you in your work? Why do you want to go back and use historical figures?
Was it James Joyce who said that history is the nightmare from which I'm trying to awake? I think that I'm engaged in that nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that performance is a way that I have found to negotiate it. The American nightmare or the German Dutch nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
It was with, again, the encouragement of M.J. Hewitt, who knew that I had an interest in history, but knew that I also had an interest in writing and knew that I had an interest in performance, who encouraged me to, combine all of those interests. I wound up playing a history professor on a sitcom called A Different World, but I don't know if that counts.
It does, definitely does.
in Phi Beta Kappa land, but it was funny to have entered graduate school thinking that I was going to do a PhD in history and wind up playing Professor Randolph on A Different World.
Love it. I love it. Peter, you do something a little different. And can you talk a little bit about your work with vets? And then we'll show a little clip of some of that work.
Yeah, so I've been doing veterans programming for several years now, inspired by a number of famous classics professors who'd served as veterans and always felt that in their work. And Jonathan Shea, who's a VA psychiatrist who published the book Achilles in Vietnam, who found that a lot of the experiences of veterans that he was working with were kind of reflected in Homeric texts. And he said, this quote is his, but I steal it. Greek drama was written by combat veterans, performed by combat veterans for an audience of combat veterans, because everybody served in Athens, and Athens was constantly at war. And I think that combat veterans respond to the truth of Greek tragedy in particular. and often the brutality of it as a reflection of what war is often to them. And of course, there's no one combat veteran, there's a plurality of experiences. But if you look at a group of American combat veterans, they look like America, right? They reflect all of us. And so they're wonderful to work with because you get these experiences. And this program I have called the Warrior Chorus is based on this idea of chorality, coming together, dancing, singing, being in a group, performing. And it's not a therapy-based program, but the vets on it say to them, many of them, it's therapeutic. And I think coming together and thinking about classical material, and let's face it, classical material does not have to be Greek and Roman. It's anything of value to a culture and its history and its past. It's our ancestors speaking to us, right? And people who've had these experiences. And I think it allows the conversation to move out of the here and now into something deeper. So a big part of what we try and do is, one of our Vietnam vets, Brian Dellett, who's actually an actor himself, he says he loves the program because it's about trying to make Americans more literate about war in a democracy, right? What does it mean when you elect leaders who take you to war, and that wars don't end, right? And that veterans come home. And then what's a veteran, right? What's a combat veteran? Family members, spouses, civilians caught up in the war. So we've really been thinking about these things. We've worked with the refugee community from Afghanistan and Syria with vets who served there, which is fascinating. And we have sort of chapters of the Warrior Chorus all over the place. And so we read and come together and think about these old ancient texts and then use them to create a discussion about what this stuff means to us today, or why are we fighting wars, and what does that mean, and what's our responsibility in a democracy? So yeah, that's really been the program as it's developed. And I think Hadley has a clip. We were lucky enough to be invited for the White House. I always have to say the Obama White. We have to define which White House now, right? The Obama White House, not the other one, which I wouldn't have gone to. But we were happy to go there and perform there. And bring our vets and our artists. So there's a little clip of kind of some of what we do. And Hadley, if you got that queued up, maybe we.
And are these actors we're going to see? They're veterans.
They're veterans and actors. So okay. We mix together Aquila's actors with veterans, and actually we've ended up hiring and training a bunch of the veterans and putting them in the company as well. So it's kind of a fluid process. But the idea is exchange. The idea is to break down the barriers. And allow Americans to realize that the 2% of people that serve in the military, that they're their citizens and they're citizen soldiers, and that they need to be listened to. And, there's lots of experts and celebrities that talk about this stuff. But to me, the experts, the celebrities are the people that served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, wherever. And we should hear from them, right? And we don't often hear from these voices, because sometimes we don't want to hear what they've got to say, right? But we need to hear what war does, right? And I think that's what this program's about.
We'd love to hear about it. So, book 23 of the Odyssey.
The great-hearted Odysseus was home again at last. The maid Eurynomy bathed in, rubbed him down with oil, and drew around him a royal cape and choice tunic too. And Athena crowned the man with beauty, head to foot, made him taller to all eyes, his build more massive, yes, and down from his brow the great goddess ran his curls like thick hyacinth clusters full of blooms. As a master craftsman washes gold over beaten silver, a man, the god of fire and Queen Athena, trained in every fine technique, and finishes off his latest effort in handsome work. So she lavished splendor over his head and shoulders now. He stepped from his back, glistening like a god. And back he went to the seat that he had left, and facing his wife, declared,
"Strange woman, so hard. The gods of Olympus made you harder than any other woman in the world. What other wife could have a spirit so unbending? holding back from her husband, home at last for her, after bearing 20 years of brutal struggle. Come, nurse, make me a bed, I'll sleep alone. She has a heart of iron in her breast.
Strange man, I'm not so proud, so scornful, nor am I overwhelmed by your quick change. You look, how well I know, the way he looked 20 years ago, setting sail from Ithaca aboard the longward ship.
Yeah, I love that scene. That's book 23 of the Iliad, when Odysseus thinks he's home, but he's not home until his wife recognizes him and she tests him, and he kind of drops his guard and he becomes very emotional. It's a beautiful scene, actually. So yeah, that's what you're watching there.
Thank you. Evie, you do something a little different. Are you going to read us a poem today?
That's what I have planned.
Good.
I realize I'm outnumbered by the theater experts and whatnot in this panel, but I'll read a poem, and one that I think exemplifies one of the things that I try to do in many of my poems, and also exemplifies one of the things that poetry does well in this context, which is to draw connections between things that we don't always talk about together. And so this poem is called Les Milles, which is French. It's the name of a village in the south of France, in Aix-en-Provence. It gave its name to a tile factory located nearby. And that tile factory is now serving another purpose, following a few other changes along the way. So the poem is dedicated to, it's in French, pour les 2000 plus, site mémorial du Camp des Milles. And that means for the 2000 and more. And I just think the only other thing I need to say is that mille means thousands in French. Les Milles. There is no poem unless we can find the courage to speak. In the middle of a vacation in the south of France, a chance to visit a World War II detention center arises, dusty and bleak, just outside Aix-en-Provence, just past the scent of lavender, in an ancient heat. The first thing you see and the last thing you visit is a boxcar. You know what it means. It takes the same toll on the breath, the pulse, as the rusted shackles displayed in another damned museum. There are histories of torture preserved all around us, formally, officially, with placards and institutional funding, casually, quietly, unavoidably, in the quality of a glance, the poverty of an existence, the demographics of a mall, a church, a prison. In a former tile factory, we learn again how anything can be misused, how anyone can be abused. A kiln is not a dormitory until it is. Here, there, slept people who were too Jewish to be German, too German to be French, too despised and feared to be defended, even by those who feared we might soon be despised. If I now say Palestine, have I forgotten Auschwitz? If I say settlements, have I now forgotten camps? If I don't say Palestine, have I forgotten Elmina, Selma, Cape Town, Haiti? Must every place name on earth be a shorthand for violence on a map of grief. Orlando, Charleston, Wounded Knee, Sharpeville, Gettysburg, Tiananmen Square, Gaza, Kachin, Plaza de Mayo, Soweto, Dominican Republic, Hiroshima, Srebrenica, Rwanda, Cambodia, Ankara, Adana, Odessa, Nanking, yesterday, and yesterday's yesterday, the planet pushing up sycamores and lavender, rice and plantains, fertilized with lead and blood, with rain from poisonous clouds and the dust that becomes of the dead. Adam, whose name means clay, was not baked in a kiln. Eve's name means life, implies the day that follows. Will tomorrow be a place we can name after something that grows? What is the proper use of a wall? There are so many histories buried in the space and silence around, within these words. These lines make a poor but portable museum, a set of sketches, palimpsests, faint and painfully incomplete, that map the territory of the human, with arrows pointing in every direction, some leading from you, some leading to you. There is no poem unless you, we, can find the courage to hear.
Evie, that's such a beautiful poem. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm listening to all these. I'm thinking about some keywords that some of you have used, and one of them is citizen. And Roger spoke about citizen and what it is to be a citizen today and what that means. And I'm thinking of Claudia Rankine's book, Citizen, and I'm thinking about other words we could use: public intellectual, public humanities, citizenship. What do these things mean at this moment? Is the meaning changing? What do we mean to be a good citizen from where we sit as teachers and scholars and artists? What are those obligations now? Do we feel it differently? I feel it differently than I did even 10 years ago. What are we called to do, any of you?
I mean, in some ways, the work is what it always has been. But I think with a greater consciousness, perhaps for a greater number of people, of the stakes, what we do in the Academy is learn and share what we learned in whatever form. A monologue, a poem, in a classroom. If we can, I think specifically to that word citizen that Roger introduced early on, if we can continue and do better, to go back to one of Peter's points, at making the students that come through our classrooms, making them informed citizens. That's our work as professionals in these professions. There's other work, and I'm all about doing work outside of the job, but that I think is the center of it for me.
I would be a classicist for a minute and say we should think about the meaning of two words, democracy and republic. That democracy is demos kratos, and it means power of the people, and to be a citizen is to be a person beyond maybe what your nationality is or where you were born, or it's to be a person, and it's to respect who lives here, right, and who is part of our culture, right? And republic is res publica, which is thing of the people, right? And so I think to be a citizen is to be an activist and an active member of both of those institutions, whether it's, you know, Republican or Democrat, right? However you want to take those charged words, but they both have the word people in it. And I think the definition of people should stand as just people, right? And that's it. So that's how I'm kind of coming at this whole thing, and how I kind of think about what we're all trying to do here.
Roger, you introduced the word, so I'm going to ask you to reflect a little bit on it, citizen.
My father said, son, I have diabetes, hypertension, and cancer of the prostate. I'm a Black man, I can't deny it. But now that I have been a Black man, son, why don't you go ahead and try it? But don't forget your father's golden rule. Get yourself a trade, go to some professional school. You get something that they cannot take away. You see, in Washington, D.C., we Negroes built the Capitol, but did we Negroes get the credit? For many a year, I ran an elevator there, and no, son, I do not regret it, because I saw firsthand that power has its ups and downs. And my second hand was on the lever, and now you want to call yourself an actor. You think you're so goddamn clever. You know, if Van Gogh was Negro, he would have cut off more than an ear. You hear? Charlie Parker, certified genius. They put him in an insane asylum. Charles Mingus, brilliant pianist. Bud Powell, he had to scroll 88 keys on his nut house wall. And what's the boy's name, the one you love to emulate? From Brooklyn. Starts with a B, Haitian, Puerto Rican. Basquiat, Jean-Michel, hell, that boy didn't live long enough to see his shit really sell. So you go ahead, you be an actor, but you never act yourself out of this coffin called the US of A. But believe me, son, when I tell you this, I love you anyway. I love you. And so does your mother. We love you just as much as we love your sister and your brother. And before it's all over, son, why don't you act something out for me? Because I want you to be the best actor that you can possibly be. Here's a scene in an elevator, right? Now here's your line. Anybody going up? Anybody going down?
Yes. All I can say is I can see why. Our chapters loved having all three of you so much. And I want to thank all of you for the work you did this year. And you've really shown us today what it is to do public work, public facing work, activist work that grows seamlessly from the kinds of scholarly work that you're all engaged in every day. And have really validated also just the mission of teaching and what it is we do when we go into public spaces and our classrooms and talk about literature and what we love. So I am just so grateful to you. And I'm watching the clock because I know at 12:55, which we're just about there, we're supposed to transition. So I'm going to go over to Hadley, but thank you all again.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was just incredible. So to change gears a bit, I'd like to introduce Linda Greenhouse, who will be presenting the John Hope Franklin Award to Jean Howard. Linda Greenhouse is a clinical lecturer in law and a senior research scholar in law at Yale Law School. She covered the Supreme Court for the New York Times between 1978 and 2008 and writes a biweekly op-ed column on law as a contributing columnist. Linda has received several major journalism awards during her 40-year career at the Times, including the Pulitzer Prize in 1998. She's been a PBK senator since 2009 and has served on the Visiting Scholar Committee for the past 12 years. Her contributions to the committee and to the program are mighty, and we'll miss having her at our table. Linda?
Well, I would feel abashed at a prosaic intervention after what we just saw. This was a fabulous hour. However, there's nothing prosaic about honoring Jean Howard. So I will proceed to bestow on her the John Hope Franklin Award, which recognizes exemplary longstanding service to Phi Beta Kappa. John Hope Franklin, as I assume people know, was one of the most distinguished American historians of the 20th century. He was president of Phi Beta Kappa from 1973 to 1976. He was elected to Phi Beta Kappa in 1953 from Fisk University, which was the first historically Black college or university ever to get a Phi Beta Kappa chapter. His major work, From Slavery to Freedom, published in 1958, was just a paradigm shifting account of American history that really, I think we can say now in 2021, foretold the kind of reckoning that we're finally having. So it's an honor to bestow this award on Jean, with whom I've served on the committee. And I'll just take 1 minute to say that the Visiting Scholar Committee, for people who have not had the privilege of working there, is an exercise in crowdsourcing to the max. Because what it does is bring a bunch of people together to sit around a table twice a year under Jean's leadership for these last years, and come up with names of people in all the different silos of the academic world, and came up with the names of the three of you. I cannot claim credit for any of the three of you, but it shouldn't work, but it does work. And Hadley's been a great steward of this, and Jean's been a great leader of it. And so we got Jean's bio at the very beginning, so I won't take the time to repeat, but it's my pleasure on behalf of Phi Beta Kappa to bestow on you, Professor Jean Howard, the John Hope Franklin Award. Congratulations.
Thank you, Linda. It was really fun to work with you all these years. I think we've been on the committee together for 9. It was great. Thanks to all of you. I think this is the end of our session today. I'll hope to see you later today in other meetings.
Thanks, everyone.